Only from the ashes of a great kingdom will another one grow. It's a story reiterated time and time again throughout history, not just in the conquest of nations, but in smaller localized affairs as well. Atari, once the top dog and pioneer of the video game industry, had a lot of fame and success attributed to them, and for good reason too. But 4 of Atari's best developers started getting sick of blatant exploitations they suffered to bring Atari to success. Decades later, and video game franchises such as Overwatch, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and others are household names from the game developer Activision, a company whose founders waged a war against Atari and won. In order to understand the obstacles that would come to challenge Activision's rise, we'll first need to provide some context about working in the early days of video games. In its infancy, the industry was heavily based off of the toy industry, in which a toy designer was paid a fixed salary working for their company no matter how successful their product was. The company the designer worked for owned the designer's products, unlike in other entertainment industries such as books, music, or films, wherein the creative talent behind a project earned the percentage of a product's success. A fixed salary, like how it was for video game designers, meant guaranteed income, but also meant they wouldn't earn more money in relation to how successful their design was. For Atari, an entertainment giant that kickstarted the video game industry in the late 70s, this business practice meant that the profit gained from their products belonged to the company, not their designers. The genius coming from Atari's design department would not get paid any more than their fixed salaries, despite their designs creating innovative games and hardware that brought about home console gaming. One day, a record of Atari's profits would confirm the company's blatant exploitation, an act that 4 designers had enough of. In early 1979, Atari's marketing department released a memo to the design department with information on the percentage of how much of the company's profits each game had contributed. The intent was to inspire their designers and show them which games were selling best. But programmers David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead noticed something different. Of the $100 million of cartridge sales Atari had made in a single year, the 4 programmers' games had generated 60% of that revenue, but this was not reflected in their pay. Despite making $60 million of Atari's $100 million revenue, the programmers only made about a $22,000 yearly salary. And as mentioned before, no matter how successful their games were, this number would stay the same. The 4 programmers decided that they were worth more than $22,000 per year, so they demanded programmer royalties from Atari CEO Ray Kassar. They were only met with a dehumanizing rejection. You're no more important to those projects than the person on the assembly line who put them together. Without them, your games wouldn't have sold anything. I've dealt with your kind before. You're a dime a dozen. You're not unique. Anybody can do a cartridge. In a dignified response, the 4 left Atari to create a company where the value of creative labor was respected, and with that core principle in mind, Activision was created. The philosophy that Activision was born on directly combated the exploitative actions that prompted its founders to ditch Atari. Under these core values, a game was not merely a product of labor to be sold under a company's name. Instead, it was a piece of art that its author deserved credit for. Not only did the programmers own the value of their own labor, but credits were granted, and Activision followed through with a full page devoted to authors in the instruction manual. But Activision would have to jump some hurdles before releasing their first game. They needed a platform to play their games on. Typically, if a company were to want to create games, they'd first need to create a console to run their games. Before Activision, companies never made games for another company's console. However, coming from Atari, Activision's founders were well versed in creating games for the Atari console. The 4 knew how the console worked and knew how to take advantage of its graphical capabilities and push its potential to the max. Thus, Activision decided that they would be a third-party developer making games for the Atari console, a concept never seen before. Of course, exploring uncharted territory meant venturing into new legal grounds, which meant that Activision had to prepare for any lawsuits and arm themselves with lawyers to ensure the legality of their pursuits. Their second issue was ensuring funding, Getting investments for software was tough, as it was difficult to see software as something tangible. The only way the programmers secured backing was by promising to produce physical cartridges, a way that investors would be able to touch and feel the results of their investment. With financial backing secured, Activision got to work preparing their first lineup in David Crane's garage. By late 1979, their first games were ready, and they were ready to present their games: Dragster, Fishing Derby, Checkers, and Boxing at the Chicago Consumer Electronics Show. Their booth was in quite an unfortunate location, being in the third sub-basement of the venue, but nevertheless, they caught people's eyes. In fact, they garnered enough attention to show up on Atari's radar. If leaving Atari was the motivation for creating Activision, then they must have been doing something right when Atari felt threatened by Activision's sudden appearance. Atari felt the need to go on the offensive, accusing Activision of stealing proprietary information and trade secrets, trying their best to shove them out of the running. Atari would ultimately file a lawsuit claiming that Activision had violated a non-disclosure agreement. But in 1982, Atari decided that this battle was a losing one, and finally decided to settle it outside of court. Surprisingly, rather than damaging the Atari name, Activision was instead doing it favors. Their hit games were supporting Atari's numbers and boosting their console sales. According to David Crane, "We were the best thing that could have happened to Atari." Finally, Atari agreed to allow Activision to develop games for their consoles and grant them royalties. The battle that the four developers had waged 3 years ago had finally been won. Today, Atari is largely a name only known from the history books, but Activision still continues to be a household brand in the gaming industry with multiple well-known franchises under their belt. After a merger with a company called Vivendi in 2007, Activision rebranded to Activision Blizzard and became the world's largest video game publisher. One may wonder if the founding goal of Activision remains after around 40 years of operation. Unfortunately, the timeline of the company has followed a corporate path seen time and time again. By 1986, the last of the original founders left Activision, and in 1991, a new CEO, Bobby Kotick, took control of the company. With a new captain at the helm came a different set of principles. In 2009, Kotick voiced support for oppressive corporate culture to keep staff in line. Sound familiar? And while Activision is known for its successful annual installments in its franchises such as Call of Duty, it's fallen to the crosshairs of criticism for forcing its developers to constrict their talent and work on a time crunch, among other deeply disturbing revelations. The story of Activision's rise is still an inspiring one, ignoring its bitter end. Yes, in its early days, Activision may have trumped the oppressive force that was Atari, but in the end, it had fallen victim to the oppressive corporate culture focused on squeezing profit from its developers. Who knows if Activision's recent controversies will spur another story like the one you heard today. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.